The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came forward. Seeing him, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, saying, "My daughter is at the point of death. Please, come lay your hands on her, that she may get well and live." He went off with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet she was not helped, but only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately, her flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who has touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to Jesus, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you asked, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid, just have faith." He did not allow anyone to accompany him inside except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and said to them, "Why this commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they ridiculed him. Then he put them all out. He took along the child's father and mother and those who were with him and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." The girl, a child of 12, arose immediately and walked around. At that, they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and said that she should be given something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Good morning. Welcome to everyone, especially visitors, and to all those joining us on the live stream this hot summer, muggy Sunday morning. Our days are filled with so many distractions. There are so many different things that are vying for our attention. Thanks to modern technology, emails and text messages and news flashes and ads and weather alerts can follow us around throughout the day. And all these are layered on top of the needs and demands of work, of our family and friends. Distractions make it hard for us to concentrate, to focus on the task at hand. Hard, too, to maintain the discipline necessary to develop good and healthy habits. And once we are able to buckle down and focus on our work or get into a habitual pattern, it's irritating to be interrupted. Interruptions stop our progress and kind of break our continuity and disrupt our pattern of living. For example, a few days ago, a landscaper accidentally cut a cable in our yard, interrupting our cable and our internet. And we all know how disruptive loss of our internet connection can be these days. Or another example, during COVID, church closings interrupted our Sunday worship habits. It's interesting that our gospel today is about interruptions. Whatever or wherever Jesus was planning to go after getting out of the boat, those plans were interrupted by a large crowd that gathered around him. Then, in the midst of dealing with that crowd, he's interrupted again by the synagogue official Jairus, who pleads with him to come and heal his daughter. No sooner is he on his way to attend to that task when a poor woman afflicted with hemorrhages sneaks up behind him and touches his cloak. He's interrupted again. But Jesus doesn't get irritated by these interruptions, just the opposite. He focuses his attention on each one. First the crowd, then Jairus, then the hemorrhaging woman, then Jairus' daughter. He interrupts the flow of blood that has disrupted the woman's life for 12 years, restoring her to health. He interrupts the seeming finality of the young child's death, restoring her to life. He's fully focused and present in and among all these interruptions, bringing compassion and healing. God is present in the interruptions in our lives. So what brings Jairus and the hemorrhaging woman to Jesus? Faith. But not the kind of faith we think of when we hear that word. A faith based on church teaching and the instruction we received when we were growing up. Rather, they had simply heard about Jesus. Jairus may have heard about Jesus from the other synagogue officials who were plotting to kill him. And the woman had heard about him because someone had told her, which, by the way, reminds us of our responsibility to tell others about Jesus. So theirs was kind of a naive faith, a faith of trusting Jesus even before they really knew him. Yet that faith, small as it was, brought them into contact with Jesus. Not just physical contact. After all, the crowd of people around Jesus were jostling, bumping, and touching him, but none of them received a miracle. The hemorrhaging woman was considered unclean because of her condition, and everything that she touched became unclean. Therefore, she was forbidden to be among the crowd. Yet she reached out her finger in faith and touched the cloak of Jesus. She reached out in hope, with a heart open to the possibilities of this Christ that she'd heard about. And Jesus felt the power of that touch. He immediately turned to her, inviting her into his loving gaze, inviting her into relationship with him, into a life-giving, living contact. In a similar act of faith, Jairus, a wealthy man of privilege and prestige, abandons all pride and pretext. He falls at the feet of Jesus and pleads with him for his daughter's life. He makes living contact with Jesus. And when they arrive at the deathbed of Jairus' daughter, it's Jesus who reaches out and touches the hand of the dead child. God enters into life-giving relationship with us when we open ourselves and make living contact with him. The miracle of the hemorrhaging woman is more than a physical healing. For 12 years, her illness has made her an unclean outcast. She was unable to attend synagogue and worship. She was unable to bear children. She'd spent all that she had on false cures, and so was poor. She was, for all intents and purposes, dead to the world. In restoring her health, Jesus brought her back to life among her people. Now she could marry and bear children and worship in synagogue. She was restored to life in the community. But more even than that, when Jesus addressed this outcast as daughter, he welcomed her into his family, into God's family. This points to something bigger than the families, communities, religious and social mores of the day. Similarly, when Jesus brings Jairus' daughter back to life, it's more than physical restoration. The child was 12 years old, the youngest age that a girl could be considered for marriage. She had, in a sense, died before she had lived as a woman, before she could marry and bear children of her own. In raising her from the dead, Jesus opens the possibility for marriage and children and a full and productive life. But even more than that, Jesus shows everyone that death is not the end of the story. Death is merely another interruption, and God is in that interruption. Our God is God not of the dead, but of the living. The pandemic is receding, and the busyness and distractions in our lives are ramping back up. Our gospel today invites us to interrupt the busy pattern of our life and to make contact with Jesus. In our post-pandemic time, that may mean coming regularly back to Mass. For in the Eucharist, Jesus is physically present and comes among us. It's in here, in this church building, that the crowds gather around the real presence of Jesus. And when we do come to meet him in the Mass, will we half consciously jostle against him amid all the other distractions of the day? Or will we come determined to open ourselves to the grace and power that can flow forth from him into our lives? God is present in the interruptions of our lives. He enters into life-giving relationship with us when we open ourselves and make living contact with him. Our God is God not of the dead, but of the living.